One of the hardest things to do is actually to raise money from another person, because we assume that it must be really intrusive. It must be really hard to do. It must be something we're asking people, something that is like listening to nails on a chalkboard. It turns out that we're actually really bad at anticipating how other people will feel. The famous psychologist Stanley Milgram, the one who did the famous shock experiments, he was a child during the Holocaust, and he was interested in the human interactions. And he once asked his graduate students to go out and ask people for seats on the subway. And the graduate students couldn't do it. They said, I can't ask someone to give up their seat on the subway. It's the height of rudeness. Like, why would someone give me their seat? And so Milgram got very frustrated with them and said, okay, I'm going to do it myself. And he went out, and even he couldn't do it. But it turns out that they were all a little bit wrong. They started looking at asking people to inconvenience themselves. One way to test that was to ask people on the subway, will you take a survey? People in train stations. And the experimenters were classically bad at predicting how many people would actually answer the survey if you just asked. And they discovered that we have this thing called egocentric bias, that we don't do a good job of predicting what's in other people's heads, even though it's the same thing that is in our head. If somebody asks you for a small donation to give to a charity, most of the time you're going to give it. How many times have you been in Safeway and they asked you, would you like to make a donation to the food bank? Now, if it was a computer that asked you, it was in complete privacy, you may not really at the moment feel like the food bank is where you want to give. But somebody asked you, you don't want to look like a miser, you don't want to look bad, so you give. I'm sure the cashier hates asking that, but that's what they've been told to do. There is this very strong reciprocal relationship that we need to develop, and understanding that what we're feeling at a moment is what other people will feel at the same time. Now, this has all been described up to this point as giving favors, but it's also true in my experience when people argue. And there's a window in this week's Parsha which says exactly that. As you know, Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, spends years in an Egyptian prison as a slave in someone else's house, and he must stew over the fact that his brothers feel nothing, no one sent an inquiry, no one sent a letter, no one knows anything. Why does no one care about Joseph? But it turns out the idea that no one cared about this is totally wrong. When the brothers finally come down and they find themselves in front of Joseph, and they find themselves confronted with a brother who's been sent to prison, they say as follows: Vayomer ish el achiv, aval hashemim anachnu, al achinu asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho. We're guilty over the fact that we saw the pain of our brother. When did they see that pain? Bitchanano eleinu velo shamanu. When he pleaded with us at the side of the pit and we didn't listen. Perhaps decades ago this happened. But they say, Al kein ba eleinu hatzara hazot. This is why this trouble has come upon us. The brothers are telling us that for all of these years, they have been feeling the pain of that event. That what they did to Joseph hurt them as well. I'm not justifying what they did. I'm not saying it was right. I'm simply saying that in this moment of tension between a family, both sides felt the pain. It's not always the victim who feels all the pain. The person who also commits the offense, there is some pain in them that brings them to do that. I'm not suggesting that that justifies it. I'm just saying that our egocentric bias tends to plant in our heads the idea that we, the victims, are the only ones who are feeling the pain. The virtue of understanding this is to know that when you are having an argument with someone, when there is an insult, when you have a tense conversation, it is a near certainty that both sides are feeling the tension, that both sides are feeling some sense of hurt. And the best way to get past it is to see the reciprocal relationship of that tension, to understand that the other side is feeling fear or pain or hurt or insecurity. And once that can be sort of put out on the table, understood, addressed, heard, listened to, otherwise accommodated, that's when you get to get to solutions. The Torah is revealing to us that our egocentric bias is in fact just that. It is a bias. It is a blindness that we need to understand that when we are feeling pain, it is just as likely that the other side of the argument is also feeling a similar pain. Hopefully this gives us the opportunity to get to a place of comfort. And especially these days, I found that the 2 years of this pandemic have really created a short fuse in all of us. Our emotional reserves have been tapped and drained. We're just a little less patient with other people. It's time to say that same burnout, malaise that I'm feeling, probably being felt by others. So hopefully this brings some light to the darkness as the holiday of Hanukkah brings us to the lighter side of the year. Hopefully this insight does so as well. Shabbat Shalom.